Welcome to Making Our Way Forward, a podcast where we share compelling life stories and learn from the experience of everyday entrepreneurs. At NACCE, we celebrate diversity and invite you to join the conversation as we talk to entrepreneurs and leaders from all walks of life. We hope that by telling their stories, we bring you inspiration, empower you to take action, and ignite entrepreneurship in your community. Welcome to Making Our Way Forward podcast, where we tell the stories of everyday entrepreneurs and leaders from around the world. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by two passionate, experienced researchers and leaders coming all the way from the UK. So it's an exciting day for us. Today, we have Winifred Soribe and Timothy Barnes. So I am going to kick us off and begin with you, Winifred. You and I became connected on LinkedIn. So you shout out to that platform because I've made a lot of professional connections through that. So why don't you begin and tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and what you're passionate about?
Hey, I'll just start by, telling you a bit about myself. Like you've said, I grew up in Abuja, which is the capital city of Nigeria, and started my first business at the age of 9, surprisingly, which was, my final year in elementary school. And it was all about making storybooks using plain A4 sheets to make them more attractive. We would stick candy to the cover page and then sell it on to our fellow students. There were 4 of us, with me being the president. And at the end of the month, what we'll do is we'll split the income evenly amongst ourselves. We didn't have any significant cost base. And that's because my dad, happily supplied me with all the A4 paper I needed, all the stationery, gel pens and things like that. And so mostly what we had to do was just get the candies ourselves. And as I progressed on to high school, which was an all-girls Catholic boarding school, I restarted my trade in business in 10th grade until 12th grade, which was when I finished high school. And so by the time I got into university, I was a guru, sort of a guru in the art of buying and selling. And part of what contributed to my skill in this area was that my parents were business orientated people. So I very much grew up in an entrepreneurial setting. My dad had a huge farming business and my mom had a fashion boutique. And after my undergrad, I decided to further my academic pursuit, having come from an academic family setting, with my dad obtaining a PhD in agricultural engineering back in the 80s from the Ohio State University, and my 2 older sisters becoming medical doctors in the state of Arizona. There in the US, academia came very natural to me. And since then, I have moved around disciplines. I've been from economics to accounting and then to finance, where I am now. And over the past 2 decades, I can say that I never really left the entrepreneurial setting. I am now only wearing different lens. Now I use my PhD research in contributing to the field, by assessing how finance can be more accessible to entrepreneurs and hopefully informing policy making. So that's really a bit of intro about myself.
That is beautiful. 9 years old. I can see you doing that. And it sparked some memories of my own. I'm actually a native Buckeye from Ohio. So I have those roots. It's fun to hear about your dad and lots to unpack there, but it reminds me of the research of entrepreneurial skills, and you seem to be just situated perfectly for that. So let's go to Tim Barnes now. So Tim, we had a wonderful conversation several weeks ago and we talked about lots and lots of things, but we didn't dig into more about you. So why don't you share with our global audience, people in 330 plus US cities and countries and continents all around the world, who is Tim Barnes? What makes you tick?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm slightly have the wind taken out of my sails, because I normally start this conversation or these kind of questions with my own story, where I say I started my first business at 14, and people go, that was young, but Winifred's beaten me by 5 years before we've got anywhere with it. So there's normally that's my opening line. I went through my education after that sort of formative experience, in which I really learned mostly that I don't understand retail as a sector of the economy, into one where, having left university, I went to work for a large management consultancy firm that in the dot-com years of the late 90s, like many big companies, decided they needed to get into the startup world, and set up a program of activity to do that. Now, I always knew that I wanted to go and work as either an entrepreneur myself or with entrepreneurs. I've always seen the entrepreneurial experience as the most creative thing you can really do in business. If you are kicking around an idea and you manage to turn that into a new business in 6 months, 18 months, 2 years down the line, you've created jobs, you've solved a problem for people that they didn't have a solution for before, because after all, that's why they're buying your product or your service. It felt like an immediate, positive, creative, impactful way to go about things. And I joined the management consultancy firm pretty much as a way of doing an MBA, but getting paid for it. So I got the training, I got all of the different industry experience, I got a fantastic network from one of the top tier firm that I was at. And then I went to work for a VC, a venture capital investment company, and we built what was at the time Europe's largest private investment firm, with about 250 investments across 5 countries across Europe. That, like many things in the dot-com years, then went spectacularly bang. And I then went off to start a company of my own, helping universities to spin out high technology companies. And ever since, for the following 20-something years, I've worked in a strange overlap. I don't know, Becky, I think in diagrams, which can be a bit difficult on the podcast, but if you imagine 3 or 4 circles, there's an overlap area between working in startups, working in universities and academia, working in big corporates, working in policy and government areas, where what you're trying to do all the time is help people to find the resources and the ecosystem they need to start the best business they can with the best chance of success. So I've basically done that for 20 years, but I've worked all of those people in different circles of the Venn diagram. So I built the world's largest university entrepreneurship program at a place called UCL, University College London. I have worked as a VC, I've worked for big corporates, I've worked with small startups. I set up about 8 accelerators and co-working spaces. I teach entrepreneurship. Just about to start a new, I've taught at UCL and Cambridge and other universities. But it's pretty much always doing the same thing. I just love helping people to start businesses and going from that bit where somebody scribbled down the idea on the back of an envelope and it's turned into something. It's a bit like being a grandparent, right? I get to do all the fun bits of advising them and giving them presents and giving them advice without actually having to do the bits where, you have to worry about learning how to change nappies and so on. And I get to do it for lots of different companies. And that's the great rewarding experience for me.
Yeah, what a great story and a background. And I too am one who thinks in pictures, much more so than words. So that really resonated with me. Interestingly enough, the circles, the overlapping circles that you were mentioning, that is really how I see the association that I lead, NACCE, the National Association for Community College Entrepreneurship, which also includes universities, because we now have what we call an everyday entrepreneur venture fund. So they're not necessarily the high tech ventures, but what they are sort of Main Street businesses. And we've been leaning into policy work, trying to assist the new administration in DC in every way, shape, or form that we can, and believe, as both of you do, that higher education, whether it's universities or colleges, really have this pivotal opportunity to drive economic recovery and inclusion and equity and all of those things, because that's really what we're designed to do. So I suspect that the three of us have in common that we jump out of bed every day and like literally can't stop doing the work that we do. And that's how I feel. And it's funny, I went on vacation recently and I was telling people it takes me a long time, several days to unwind, because I'm just thinking about like all these things that we could do and opportunities, which is cool. But I want to ask you both another question. We believe at this organization and on this podcast, making our way forward, that mentoring and people who serve as examples in your lives just make all the difference. Sometimes it's enough to get you started on a path of something that you love, as we all do, or can steer you in a direction of something that you never really thought about before. So I'm going to ask you both to share with us a mentor or somebody who's really made that difference in your life, something that you haven't mentioned so far that you'd like to share. And Winifred, we'll go back to you first, and then Tim will go to you.
Okay, someone that has really inspired me is my dad. I totally look up to him. I'm really a dad's girl. And if I go back and tell some of the stories, like I've said earlier, I came from an academic orientated family, and my dad, played a really strong role in helping me find an appropriate career path. And one of the stories I would like to share here is I remember when I was in high school and, when I progressed up until 10th grade, and as per the educational system back in Nigeria, you'd had to choose, do you want to go to science? Do you want to go into social sciences, or do you want to go into the arts? And, coming from a very, very science-based family, I naturally tilted to the sciences, but I found out that I struggled in physics and chemistry, and it wasn't my strong point. And at the end of the second term in 11th grade, my dad took a good look at my report card and said, Winifred, I think you're better in literature, economics, so maybe you might do better in the social sciences. And so the next term I moved over, and I'm really glad I made that switch very early on in my career and in my academic pursuits, because when I moved over to the social sciences, I did really well there. And when I fast forward, a decade and more later on today, I'm happy. I'm really happy with where I am. I'm happy that I made that switch, because if not, I might have floated through the sciences. I might not have done as well. And, for me, I would always appreciate my dad for that advice. I also have my PhD supervisors who have been very supportive and have given me the opportunity to excel. So yes, those are the people I think that have really, played a very strong role in my career path today.
Beautiful. Tim, how about you?
Well, I've never had actually what we a mentor in the way that we perhaps now discuss them. I've never had somebody where I sat down and said, "Can we have that kind of relationship?" And I've provided that for other people. But when I was in the early stages of my career, it wasn't a way that we discussed things. But I had a really lucky experience the year after I graduated, first graduated. I had a role at the university that I'd been attending, which meant that I got a lot of face-to-face time with the individual who ran the university. In the US, sort of president is not the way to refer to them here, but it would be that kind of equivalent. And his name was Sir Derek Roberts. And in the year that I was able to see a lot of him and see how he worked up close, I have never, ever learnt more from anybody, both good and bad, about how to run companies and organizations. He was an extraordinary personality, very direct, got a lot of things done, huge amount of energy. And he taught me a lot about where the line should be with your principles in business and the things that matter and don't. How he was incredibly self-deprecating. And he didn't make life easy for the people around them. He expected huge amounts of himself and of everybody else who was there. And he is the individual that I still, a quarter of a century on, think about and react to and use anecdotes from when I'm trying to communicate things now with the people that I might be working with and mentoring. And that actually is the second part of my answer to your question, Becky. I know I still don't have a mentor, and I indeed mentor other people, but my word, do I learn a lot from my students in formal settings and just the young people that I've worked with. I'm on the chairman of a charity that we have in the UK, which we confusingly call NACCE, not quite the same thing as yours, but NACCE, the National Association of College and University Entrepreneurs, very much a student-led group. And the former CEO of that nominated me for an award that I received from the Queen about 5-6 years ago around entrepreneurship and enterprise promotion. And so I found the relationship with many of the younger people that I work with, how they interpret things, how they're working, seeing the world, how those technologies are useful, every bit as instructive, informative, inspiring as anything I ever got from a senior figure as a mentor, with stuff coming down. It really is, paying it forward, paying it back, paying it up, down, left, right, whichever way around. And it isn't always that great mentoring relationships take the sort of the archetype, the haggard, experienced figure and the young protege. The things work much more 360, and I don't think we always spend enough time thinking about that.
Yeah, I love what you said about being open, because I think some of the people I've learned the most from, I bring up my grandfather a lot because he wasn't a formally educated person. He was in the military and the Navy, and had to drop out of school to help support the family. But I've never known anyone in my life who's known more about botany and how to grow things and that. And I think approaching that in a spirit of wandering and wondering. I saw something on social media recently, and it just resonated with me, is putting yourself out there into the world. And while we all have accumulated lots of degrees, to me, I just am continually stunned to see, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that. And I think that's the way that you keep yourself really, I think, engaged in the universe and being a global citizen. So Tim, you had mentioned a little bit about NACCE, the organization that you and Winifred are a part of, and I was really intrigued. That was one of the things I didn't know about until she reached out to me via LinkedIn, and I was really excited to learn about that organization and what you do with students. So maybe I'll go back to Winifred, and maybe both of you could reflect on that organization and why is it so important to you, and what kind of an impact does it make in the economy and in people's lives over in the UK?
Okay, I'll just briefly mention that, with regards to NACCE, it's one of the charities that I partner with. And, so Team is the chair of trustees there. And when I thought about this roundtable and how we can, think about collaborating across borders and trying to see, what are the best practices in the US, in Europe, in other parts of the world, and how can we really create some best practices. And when I thought about that, I was recommended to you by a contact of mine, Tim Strage, on LinkedIn, and I decided to reach out. And I, said, this is something we can do. NACCE and NACCE can do something, and hopefully we can create an environment where people, especially startups, because what you tend to see is most people within the university setting, they go through the university setting, they might come across entrepreneurship, especially if they're business management students in the UK, they might come across the entrepreneurship module only once. And so whatever they're able to get from that might be what they would use to eventually start up their business. And so the thing is, as we create, entrepreneurial education best practices, we think about how can we create, knowledge, stocks of knowledge that students can use to be able to start businesses and hopefully grow them? Or how can we help those that are trying to start up, even if they've not had any formal education, but trying to start up generally? How do we, create something, a system that can help them gain the necessary knowledge that they would need to succeed in the real world? So that's really why I, came up with this roundtable to see what, we can bring together and create something for people to use.
Yeah, I love that, best practices and what do we learn from one another as global citizens and lifelong learners, as well as teachers and instructors. So Tim, I'm going to toss it over to you. What do you have to say?
Well, just to give a bit of NACCE context. So NACCE was started 11, nearly 12 years ago by a group of university students who'd found each other across, well, mostly initially in 2 universities, but it spread to a small group of about a dozen, and who were looking for peer support in exploring the entrepreneurial landscape. Universities at the time were doing a pretty good job, early and emergent in some cases, but of the traditional academic type courses around entrepreneurship, but weren't really doing as much, or at least many of them weren't, for the kind of extracurricular and outside of academic study type support activities. And where they were, it tended to be again, just a kind of cut down version of a slightly broadcast, this is how you do it, this is how you write a business plan, and wasn't really felt to be sufficiently kind of ground up. And so the students got together and they pulled together what was initially started as a kind of one-off event that they wanted to put together to share experiences of what they were doing. And over the next couple of years, NACCE developed as a legal entity, as a registered charity in the UK, raising money, not huge amounts, but still with the idea that it was organized around students and supporting the entrepreneurship societies, student societies that were cropping up in universities across the country, and what we call FE colleges, further education colleges, which they're not quite analogous to the US term, but the massive education institutions that were out there, particularly for people post 17. And that's pretty much what's at the heart of it still today. We run a program of activities. We have a student-led board who meet currently online, obviously, every few months and tell us about things that they think they would find useful. We use it to share best practice between what different student groups are doing around the country. We host an annual student entrepreneurship conference, which is unimaginatively called the Student Enterprise Conference, which takes place every spring, does what it says on the tin, with several hundred students from across the country, and of course that means from across the world, because these are students who are at UK universities mostly, and we have a very high proportion of students in the UK, in UK universities, are from overseas. So it tends to have a very international flavor. We run a national competition for pitching and venture ideas that takes place with big corporate support each year as well, and a whole load of smaller scale ongoing activities and training. But it's there really as a framework to help students connect with each other and for them to tell us what they're looking for and for us to try and find solutions to that from some of the old folk like me who have grey beards, or from the corporates that may be able to support us with checks, but also from from each other. And that element of student-to-student peer learning is at the heart of what we do.
That is wonderful and really impactful. It's a bit different than NACCE, the organization connected to this podcast, because we work more with faculty and with presidents, and we try to equip them and educate them so that they can do a better job serving students. And I think what you all have spent a lot of time investing in and supporting is something that provides tremendous value to students. We had a conversation last week. We were in Chattanooga with a number of different presidents from a lot of US states, and they were talking about really looking at the student as the customer, and looking at it from, a servant leader, a service perspective of how can we help them to succeed? How can we, honor their journeys, but present them with other opportunities to wander and wonder, and do a lot of the things that we're talking about here. And you all are doing that. I'm so excited about that roundtable. I can't wait, because anytime I have conversations with people like you, the time literally flies, and I wish that we had more. But as we're coming up against the end of this episode, I would love it if each of you could maybe close us out with something that you are hopeful about. In the world, the pandemic is not over. Certainly in the US, we got some news yesterday about the scary part of this, this variant, and some kind of information about how to protect ourselves from it. But we always lean into hope and opportunity, which is the work that we do with students and each other. So Winifred, why don't you just share maybe just a brief couple words about what you're hopeful with, and then Tim, you can close us out.
What I'm most hopeful about is the fact that the pandemic has shown us that entrepreneurial skills and entrepreneurship is the way forward, as we strive to create a more equitable society. And so when we look at it from different perspectives, environmentalism, innovation, diversity, and inclusion, entrepreneurship does provide, everyone, regardless of your race or gender, with the opportunity to, create innovative products or services, and hopefully protect the environment and improve economic welfare. So I'm really hopeful about the fact that as we make some progress out of the pandemic, we would have created a better ecosystem for entrepreneurship to thrive, and especially as we move into the digital age.
Perfect. Tim?
So I don't want to ignore the homework question, Becky, but I think if we've got an audience of entrepreneurs out there, they don't need to be convinced that that the world is full of opportunity. If you've got an entrepreneurial mindset, you're going to be optimistic, because after all, if entrepreneurs aren't optimistic, then they'd never start anything, because you start looking up a hill going, here's a whole load of things that don't exist that I need to bring into being, and I need to convince a whole load of people to do this thing with me when they don't even believe it's a problem, and I need to do that with no resources because I haven't raised those yet. So and 99 times out of 100 people are going to fail. So they're naturally optimistic. My message would actually be, you're right to be optimistic, because there's a great deal to be optimistic about. What gives us as entrepreneurs, a great deal of opportunity is change, is disruption, is the idea of the shaking up of established players and industries. And what we've seen over the last 18 months is every industry, from retail to transportation, entertainment, drug discovery, has been rocked to its core across the Western world. And in that, there are simply thousands, countless, millions of opportunities, of problems. That wonderful word for entrepreneurs, problems. Everybody else, it's a negative thing. But for entrepreneurs, there are problems that need solving, that need new products and new services. You've never probably looked out in any generation for, probably the best part of 60, 70 years, at a landscape with so many problems that need solving, so much space and opportunity for disruption. What a fantastic time to be an entrepreneur. And everybody who tells you you're irrationally optimistic, well, yeah, you are a bit irrationally optimistic, but you have a great deal to still be optimistic about.
That is so well said. Here in the United States, the current White House has a program they call Build Back Better. And I like it because it's easy to remember. But it's
to be fair, Becky, we've stolen that. We use that here too.
That's good. Well, I appreciate both of you so much. I can't wait to re-engage with you in September. I'd like to invite you, if you ever come over to the US, we would love to host you here in Raleigh. There's a lot of really exciting entrepreneurial things that we can gain. So maybe we can figure out a way, once it's safe to do so, to spend some time in person. And I just wish all of our listeners around the globe a wonderful day, and think about the little nuggets that you've learned and how you might make your way forward with an entrepreneurial mindset.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that listening to this podcast will help you to explore the many ways we might define entrepreneurship. Join us every other Wednesday for more episodes as we celebrate opportunity, learn from one another, and grow together. Subscribe to this podcast, connect with us on social media, and learn more about today's speakers at nacce.com/podcast. We look forward to making our way forward together with you.
Have you heard about our latest book, Impact Ed: How Community College Entrepreneurship Creates Equity and Prosperity? This is our roadmap for building back better in 50 states and globally. In each chapter, we share the inspiring stories of everyday entrepreneurs and explain how community colleges play a crucial role in their success. Visit us at nacce.com/impacted to order your copy now and join us in this work.